I would like to go ahead and introduce Mark Huang, who is the co-founder of SeaAhead. But a little bit about Mark. He's quite a Renaissance person. His background is in engineering, but he's quite a polyglot. He's studied a wide variety of things after his engineering degree, including business and economic development. Mark has worked in venture capital. He's also worked on city and regional economic development in Rhode Island. And he brings that expertise now to SeaAhead. Mark will tell you about SeaAhead, but I want to say that Mark now lives in Chapel Hill, and he's a great asset for North Carolina. Mark is working hard to create a strong Bluetech cluster here in North Carolina that will link the private sector, academia, to create dynamic public-private partnerships in this area. Mark will give you more of his vision, but it's a great pleasure to have Mark in this region, and I think he's going to really do a lot to transform, especially the economy of the coastal part of our state. Thank you so much, Mark.
Greg, thank you. Okay, let's see if can we all see that? No. There we go. Thank you for having me. I think it was right before COVID. Last time I was here, we had just moved to the area, and we had that raging snowstorm that shut down the last event. I think we got 2 inches. Mark, I'm a founder of SeaAhead. I'm going to spend about 10 minutes talking about Bluetech, but within the context of venture-based entrepreneurialism. And then we really, I think, want to hear the startup speak. We'll do 5-minute flash talks. So SeaAhead, we are now actually 8 people. It's been 4 years, hard to believe. The first 18 months was definitely all on sweat equity. As Greg mentioned, I actually started out on the waterfront. I was a marine engineer, left the shipyards, and spent really about 15 years doing clean tech. The team has a seafood background, has a clean tech startup background as well. And we're based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Kendall Square, and we just opened up a office in Gulfport, Mississippi, which I'll talk about right now. Is part of our construct is this idea of the triple bottom line, is that you have both a economic opportunity tied to the ocean, you have a sustainability mandate that is synced with the economic opportunity, and 3, the third part of the triple bottom line is job creation, not just for data scientists and a lot of the technology, life science graduates, but as well as good, solid working class jobs, where we believe on our coastal economies, we can tackle a lot of the rising inequality on income that we see in the US over the last many decades. And that's one of the reasons why we're working in Mississippi. So backdrop. So what is Bluetech? People have asked, what is Bluetech? I don't get this triple bottom line, never heard of the term before. So one, let's put a couple 3 to 4 major backdrop points. One, this is an OECD report about the size of the ocean economy. And the takeaway is essentially that the world's ocean economy is expected to grow at twice the rate of global GDP. We believe this is actually an underestimate because it's a very linear report. Linear meaning this is all the shipping, this is all the aquaculture, this is all the fisheries. It doesn't take into account some ancillary sectors that are coming to bear on the ocean, which I'll talk about. So we actually think the economic backdrop for the so-called ocean economy is actually much larger. This, I think we've all seen these type of images. This is the sustainability question, is as we humans, humanity is spending a lot more time on the ocean, particularly at the coasts and its impacts, whether that be carbon, smog, plastics, or just the impact on starting with the marine mammals and ocean plastics. So from where we at SeaAhead, our view is that we take an ocean-centric approach and go out. So when we bump into the climate tech group, which is getting a lot more attention these days, is like the only subtle difference is that we start from the ocean looking out as opposed to the ocean as an afterthought. So it's just some facts that about our ocean. I think many probably already know this, but if you don't, 50% of our oxygen is roughly generated by the ocean. It's our carbon sink. Almost 1 billion people in the world still depend on the ocean as their primary source of protein. 80% of global trade is through deep sea shipping. So when you point and click, particularly in COVID, it's not just a class 3 truck, that dirty truck that dropped off your 4-ounce package, but chances are it started out on a ship out in across the Pacific. So what is, on a positive note, as far as we see more industrialization of the ocean, what is changing as a backdrop? One, we are starting to see more awareness of the ocean, out of sight, out of mind, probably for a long time, definitely by the regulators. I spent the good part of my career working on land-based clean tech, diesel trucks, coal plants. Nobody really thought about the ocean. That's starting to change. We consumers are saying, this can go in the ocean. I might cut up my 6-pack, or I might not even buy that 6-pack because of the plastic rings, because I realize that it goes out, likely there's a good chance it's going out to sea. So we have more awareness from the public. This formatting screwed up, sorry. 2, we're seeing regulatory pressures in the maritime sector for the first time. Some of the, whether it be carbon, which is just starting like any other sector that's being looked at, but as well as sulfur and sulfuric acid and smog, regulations that really land-based has been looking at for 30 to 40 years are being forced to comply with, is just starting to hit the shipping sector. 3, which is what I'm going to focus on in a minute, and which is what our Flash Talk startup company is going to talk about, is in the meantime, we have declining cost curves in other sectors. The ability to gather data, the ability to crunch data, material science advances in clean tech. The cost of the lithium-ion battery from electric cars today is less than 1/10 of what it was 10 years ago. These technologies can now be brought out to sea. Last, we're seeing interest from corporates for the first time, whether that be ESG or dedicated financing around a sustainability metric, not done before. Quickly example is the Poseidon principle. Most of them European banks, they will not finance a vessel unless there's a plan that on, let's say, recycling a vessel or reducing carbon. So these are at least tailwinds. So we at SeaAhead is really looking at creating this third leg. What hasn't happened in the past, we've had researchers, we have our policy people, we have our nonprofits fighting for the health of the ocean. What we haven't seen, like we see in clean tech and other sectors, is this new stool, a new leg on a stool, which is the idea of STEM-based venture innovation tied to ocean sustainability. So the question is, has there been a precedent? And looking for at least my background, starting in the late 90s, there is. Back in the late 90s, when the grid started to decentralize heavily on coal, renewables played that journey continues, as is being talked about today. Startups played a big role. Second, automotive going to electric. Tesla didn't invent the electric car, but they definitely, I think nobody can argue, have heavily influenced the pace and the adoption rate of electrification for transport as a startup. And then food. So it doesn't have to be always tech. Food is really interesting because, particularly in the US, it's not a technology driver or a regulatory driver, it was a market driver, particularly millennials. They eat differently, organic, sustainable, and big food is still struggling to adjust to the changes in that market. Once again, startups played, whether they played a role or they accelerated the transformation, or they even actually disrupted these 3 traditional industrial sectors. So similar analogy that we see today as an early adopter is that the ocean economy, benchmarking these 3, is ripe for more venture-based innovation, as we'll hear soon from our speakers. Quickly, we are in Boston. I'll just skip this for time. We essentially run an incubator in Boston for Bluetech. You don't get a blank look anymore if you wanted to work on, let's say, data analytics tied to aquaculture or reducing the amount of antibiotics that's going into your shrimp. We provide a grant, we provide mentoring. We have a Blue Angels program, because if the companies can't get funded, it's all moot. And now, after 4 years, we're out in the market raising an early stage Bluetech fund that will allow us to move faster and write bigger checks rather than just angel investments. How do we look at the world? This is a little confusing, but the verticals are where we see that triple bottom line opportunity: growth, sustainability on the ocean, job creation. Aquaculture, making it cleaner. A lot of talk about offshore wind today, making shipping cleaner, ocean plastics. And the bravest startups we see are the ones tackling climate change from the ocean's perspective. what we see is the horizontals, the opportunities. I think the key takeaway here is that if you're, let's say, a computer science major, you don't need to wake up in the morning and say, I'm an ocean blue tech person. So traditionally, people say, well, you should be talking to the marine science department. Of course we do, because they're the experts that live on the ocean. But we're also seeing a lot of technology, whether it be later stage students, or even people who are in their 40s who have been there, done that, and saying, I want to do something on the ocean as an entrepreneur. I'm going to bring my skills from my material science background or from my technology background. And lastly, on the opportunity, we also, once again, emphasize is blue tech, the ocean overlaps with many other sustainability sectors. We've invested in companies that are in ag that we can bring over into aquaculture or vice versa. I mentioned the clean tech overlap, which a lot of talk about today, green hydrogen, offshore renewables, and the future of maritime, as well as circular economy. We had 2 startups that focused on plastic recycling in our last cohort graduation 2 weeks ago. And our thesis there is most of everything we do in humanity ends up washing out to sea. We looked at bridge technologies related to this point. Vector is a plasma water treatment focused on land-based, like PFAS, leachate, all the nasty stuff on land. Now their technology is, with our help, has been vetted to go after invasive species in ballast water should that market resurface based on a regulatory driver of invasive species. Beta hatch mealworms for chickens, as well as organic fertilizer. Why catch more where we shouldn't catch more wild fish meal to feed our salmon? Can you feed them something that fish have already naturally eaten? That's bugs. Vinci is an interesting one. The founder dropped out of school. His mom made him go back to school in Boston. He has graduated. He was coding and making AR, VR for the military, typical training, kicking down doors and as such. We said, join our incubator. Long story short, after we introduced them to the maritime sector, offshore wind, Siemens Gamesa said a comment, is like 80% of our offshore wind turbine workers wash out. Why? Because after the training, we put them on a boat, they get seasick. And then if they don't fall out there, they fall out when they end up hundreds of stories above the water. So essentially the AR, VR tool is meant to simulate what it's like to be on a wind turbine out at sea. Once again, an enabling technology with each one of these companies are not focused on the ocean economy, but they can play a big impact. I think I'm just going to stop there. And this slide is meant to be busy, but these are some of the startups on our platform. And yeah, we'll just stop there as far as to say that there's a lot of companies out there. It's actually a bigger market than initially when we first started thinking about blue tech. And instead, I'll let our 4 startups give a representation of the types of startups we're seeing on the water. So on that, we're going to do 4 flash talks. Britta, you're up first. If I can find your pitch. You are there.
There I am.
There you go. Okay. There we go.
It's the right
All right.
one.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mark. Let's see. I'm going to get to the. Great. So I'm representing T Omega Wind. We are radically redesigning the floating offshore wind turbine to be optimized for the oceans. And to do such a disruptive approach, that really requires rethinking. So one evening 3 years ago, I was attending an event like this, a clean tech event in Charlotte, North Carolina. And at the time, I had just taken on a new role as the head of electric vehicle infrastructure for my company. And one of the speakers that night asked us to raise our hands, all of us that owned and drove an electric vehicle. And I had to keep my hand down. I had wanted to buy an electric vehicle, but I had a Volvo station wagon that I absolutely loved. My team who were in the attendance that night, they were looking at me and I promised them, I'm going to buy an electric vehicle. So I went to all of the auto dealers and test drove all of the various models. And what I recognized was that all of the legacy automakers that I visited, they designed a hump in the middle of the back seat. So I was wondering, why is that? This is the hump, that really makes it uncomfortable to sit in the middle seat in the back. If you put your feet on it, then your knees are up by your chin, or if you put your feet on either side, you're approaching on the other passenger's space. But this is really there for the exhaust and the drive shaft. So it dawned on me that the legacy automakers had just repurposed the body of the gas car. I found this to be different from Tesla. The Tesla was designed from scratch to be an optimal solution for EVs. And I liken that back to T-Omega Wind. Differently than the current offshore wind technology that are based on land-style wind turbines that are held at a single point and can't really take motion very well. They have to have these very large support structures, to make them actually be wave resistant and not move. Well, at T-Omega, we've redesigned that, and I'll get back to you in 1 minute on our design. So you can probably already hear that I'm not from Charlotte, North Carolina. I was born in Oslo, Norway, and I grew up about 20 minutes outside the center city. I have a passion for sailing, and I sailed competitively on the Oslo Fjord, so I know the power of the wind and also the oceans. I am educated in the US, so I was on the sailing team of my college here, and although I have my MBA from Columbia Business School, I came here twice to UNC for the Keenan-Flagler Leadership Development Program. 2 of my employers sent me back for the same program. It was excellent. My first job out of college was for Statoil. It's now called Equinor. And I worked for them in Norway and also as an expat in the US. I worked for several years for ExxonMobil and the downstream business there. And then after 20 years in the oil and gas industry and working for an electric utility, I joined T-Omega Wind. And I found that as an entrepreneur, you really need to align your work with your passion. For me, that is to align with, my passion for the ocean and for green technology. So here's our solution, T-Omega. As you can see here, rather than being held at one single point, it's held on 2 sides, which makes it withstand motions, makes it stronger. And due to the fact it's stronger and can take motions, we have lighter legs structure and also a much shallower draft than the legacy. And our solution is anchored to the sea bottom, and it actually weather vanes like a ship at anchor. So it moves with the power and direction of the wind, the waves, and the current then. And our structure is scalable, and we can use existing boat yards, and also you use local labor to fabricate and to do the simplified assembly. We can tow our solution out to the site and back for operating maintenance and also for repairs. And we don't need specialized ships to do so. This allows for lower operating expenses and capital expenses. And that allows us to open up a greater market for where the current technology really is not viable due to economics and the need for deep water ports and specialized ships. And this again brings green power and affordable power to more people around the globe. Thank you.
Tessa, let's find you.
Oh, wait.
Hit right this one right there. That should do it.
Beautiful. Hello, everyone. Okay, that's loud. Thanks so much for being here. I'm super excited to be a part of these wonderful talks and let you guys know about what we're doing at AlgaeNet. So at AlgaeNet, what we do is we are the connectors between two very different supply chains. My background is in design within the fashion world. However, when looking at the extravagantly negative consequences that that ecosystem creates, myself and my co-founders came together to start a company that connected the beauty of aquaculture and kelp and seaweeds with fiber manufacturing and textiles. So what we're doing is creating proprietary chemistries that allow for us to create solutions to the mass problem with fast fashion by not only capturing and eliminating CO2 usage, but thinking about the microplastics, water usage, pesticides, all of the kind of negative contributions that typical legacy materials are creating. And we're doing so in order for us to act quickly and efficiently to solve some of the world's most challenging problems. In case you're unaware, textiles are one of the largest contributors to global CO2 emissions, again, contributing to a large amount of freshwater usage, and surprisingly enough, the largest single consumer of insecticides per industry. And because of this, with the contribution of all these factors, from capacity to climate change, we're really seeing this massive gap that is actually kind of coming to fruition a lot sooner than we expected with the challenges created with the recent supply chain shortages, and that there's a gap. There's new materials that are required in order to continue filling the demands that businesses and consumers are requiring. And so for us, when we went about thinking about this idea and this real problem, we asked ourselves, how do we work with what we have? How do we go about thinking about innovation from a place of resource alignment and speed and ease of scale? And so the kelp supply chain and infrastructure is already in existence. I mean, it's a product that's grown, or an organism that's grown on nearly every continent outside of Antarctica. And the extraction and biopolymer production is used for a wide range of products, from your toothpaste to your ice cream to a lot of the medicines that you have in your closet. And so we wanted to work with things that were already there at scale, along with manufacturing systems that are clearly already at scale and proven out. And the combination of these two factors allow us to create something that is quite unique, but not overly complex or, creating diverse sets of challenges than we need that to do. So basically how this works is, again, we're working with existing polymers. We create proprietary chemistries in-house to create a solution that then goes into existing fiber manufacturing systems. The yarn is spun and then can be used by designers and brands around the world in order to transform their polluting processes into the circular economy. A little bit about this beautiful, inspiring organism, kelp. Not only is it widely abundant, but it's highly impactful. It filters agricultural runoff, it captures CO2, and it helps to regenerate a lot of the dead zones that are caused by overfishing, all the while acting as a supplemental income source for local farmers and fisheries as well. I'll just skip on to the next one for time's sake. So I think actually, Mark, what you were saying before, which is really around innovation and interdisciplinary collaboration. And for us, what we're really focused on, and why I'm super excited to be here today, is that in order for us to solve some of the world's greatest challenges, and for us, that's fibers and textiles, we need to get out of our silos that we've been working in for so long and really be collaborating between design, engineering, chemistry, marine biology, manufacturing, so many of these different fields that are really required for us to create something that's much bigger and bolder than what we have today. And so for us, we're actually very excited to announce that we're moving here to the Research Triangle. And for us, that's Morrisville from Brooklyn, New York. We'll be opening up, thank you. Wow, okay. We'll be opening up our offices over in Morrisville and are really excited for this to be the new hub for us to collaborate with all the different resources, all the different experts, everyone that's so passionate in this field. And I definitely couldn't imagine a better event for us to kick that off with. Thanks so much for inviting us as well. Yeah, that's all we have. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Tessa. Our third regional local company to present is Matt, all the way from Raleigh. Matt, where are you? You are, I don't see you. I saw you earlier. There you go. Okay, here we go.
Perfect. Thank you. So aligning our passions, I think aligning our passions with our work, that is awesome. I love that. And it's why I became an entrepreneur. And I would encourage all the students out there that are thinking about what they're going to do afterwards to consider that, because we need more of it, right? We need more people passionate about what they're doing and making big changes in the world. And, you know, part of what it is to be human is to enter into a narrative that's outside of ourselves. And I think the climate change and these aspects of ecosystem degradation, it captures us, right? Because we're all on this planet. We all have to take care of it, but it's hard. It's hard to figure out what to do. It's hard to know what kind of changes you're making it and if it even makes a difference. And I think we're experiencing that as individuals. There are countries that are experiencing that, and then companies, corporations are experiencing that as well. And so at Natrix, we're helping specifically companies, corporations that have large amounts of linear infrastructure out there, help them realize the opportunity that they have to incorporate nature-based solutions and have benefits that will benefit all of society just through changing the way that they're managing some of that infrastructure. And for me, I grew up in Louisiana, which has an existential threat of sea level rise and hurricanes that are damaging whole communities, are being relocated. Cultural centers like New Orleans is being threatened. And so I made it a mission to figure out what can we do about this. And early on, I realized we're going to have to tackle things differently. We're going to have to look at what we have. And what does Louisiana have? They don't have a lot of rock. There's no mountains in Louisiana, right? But they have a lot of oysters and they have a lot of wetlands. And so can we use those to protect the infrastructure? And so as a coastal engineer, that's what I was trained in, is coastal engineering, had an opportunity to work around the world. And I saw similar ways that we could do that with mangroves, with other things. And they have so many benefits to society. As Mark said, you know, the oceans are sequestering a third of the human CO2 that is emissions. So how can we utilize these systems? And this is an image of a nature-based solution that we put out, and it was subjected to the largest hurricane of the century, and it performed better than rock. So why aren't we using these? Well, again, it's hard, and it's the expertise is not always there to know how. And, you know, as I've looked around, as probably we've all looked around, we're out of balance, right? We have more man-made mass than living-made mass on this planet, as you can see in this graph. There's been more non-permeable mass poured in the last 10 years than all of human existence up to 1980. This is not a good path. We can do better, right? And corporations, the SEC, institutional investors, they're all wanting metric-backed systems in place to record how are things going. And this is becoming mandatory. Just last week, you had a climate disclosure rule that was passed by the SEC. So I think we're going to see more and more of this, but it's that desire to, again, can we do something about it, and how do we know? And even as we do things like offshore wind, social license is not a given. There's still public outcry when there's development, and delays are happening. And this is bad for society, right? Because we need these things to be done, but it's also bad for the investors. And when that happens, the investment is not flowing to those things as freely. And how do we free that up? How do we communicate that we're going to do things and we're going to do things better? So some of the options to date are to buy offsets, and there's different qualities of offsets, but why not do something on your own property where you're benefiting the community around you? So you have assets out there as a company. You can do something on there. You can do well with that. So what if I told you that you can maintain that, corporations can maintain that infrastructure while generating huge societal and environmental co-benefits? Well, this is exactly what we're doing with some of our clients. We're helping them to integrate nature-based solutions into their infrastructure management, which reduces their carbon footprint. It increases biodiversity and community engagement, and can also enhance our IRRs. And we do this by helping them enable practical changes. So not something that is really hard to do, but what are some real things that you can do? And then we help them validate those benefits through third-party verifiers, and then engage with their critical stakeholders in these projects. And we do this by a platform approach that we've developed. And it starts with an execution and planning of the most appropriate solutions, most sustainable solutions. And then we assess that performance and then report back relevant KPIs. Some of our core technology on the physical side, the physical execution side, is what we call dry forming process. And this is an advanced manufacturing technology in combination with advanced materials, where we can produce on-demand structures that act as a form for those natural systems, whether that's oysters or mangroves or corals, to then grow on, and we can enhance it with biological features. And then the material itself is low carbon, and we even have a new material now that's negative carbon. And so for every piece that you put out there, you're actually sequestering carbon. And these are mobile systems that can be moved to the point of need, where you can use local labor and have positive impact on the economy there. And it can produce up to 20,000 tons per year. And it's very scalable. So each one of these, you can put out more and more of these systems. And then we partner with local firms such as Danos, which are trusted and experienced implementation partners. And they help us to get the jobs done efficiently and safely. And after construction, we have proprietary software that allows us to continually and remotely monitor the projects and then report back those metrics systematically. And then this is all automated, and it feeds into a UN Sustainable Development Goal Framework report. And then we deliver these ESGs systematically using the best available science, so that our clients have the opportunity to show progress towards their ESG goals. So, and as we move forward, we believe that we can be a big part of making a change and helping corporations transition to more sustainable practices, whether they're legacy or the new energies that we've been talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Our last but not least flash talk is not local. Hugo came all the way from the Netherlands and represents the cleantech Bluetech intersection that I mentioned. Hugo, I'm looking for you here. I don't see you here.
That's one. Yeah.
This one. No, that's not. No. Sorry. There we go.
Yes,
There you go. Sorry. Okay.
thank you. for being present here. Thanks to Mark inviting me over, all from Europe. Because I can imagine the Netherlands, where is it? It's Europe. I founded the company Hydro 2016. Why? Because if you want to complete the energy transition, you need to have molecules, not only electrons. I come a little bit later to that. I've worked 15 years in the oil and gas industry. Then I had to think, let's move to renewables because it should be sustainable business. And that, working for turbine design and manufacturing companies, learned me a lot on what are the limitations of electrons. The main difficulty is the moment you produce, you need to have a client. And the infrastructure is very costly. So we worked out our something that we say, let's produce hydrogen directly from wind. Yes, there will be an electronic generator in between. And what is the optimum? What could we reach? Because also people talk, say, we have so much sea space. Question, is that really true? I think space is, the amount of space you have is always an issue. You should be very careful on space. So if you can double the energy production out of a square mile, so to say, here put a square kilometer, that's European talk. How can we do that? Don't forget, a wind turbine producing electricity is an economically optimized product. And if you go to hydrogen directly, you need to do some small modifications to the product to become the optimized hydrogen production product. But this enables that we have on similar space 2.4 more possibilities to reduce our carbon footprint. We have, if we compare it, that we build big electrical wind farms and transport all the electrical energy to the shore and then convert it to hydrogen, compared to if we do that in the product itself, we have double the amount. So that is where the importance is, because it's not like oil and gas. It is an OPEX-based business. Renewable energy systems are investment-based businesses. So if you have more products out of the same investments, your product cost becomes lower and it's more efficient. I'm here for small talk, so we don't go into all the technical details. But one thing, and that's more what you must remember, in principle, when we look to fixed bottom wind installations, that you can do just at the East Coast in the area of Boston, New York, or in the North Sea, the hydrogen per megawatt hour can be cheaper than electricity per megawatt hour. This means if you want to have your molecules and you first put the electricity to shore and then convert it, it always will become more expensive. So that's why we said, what we want to deliver to the world is affordable green hydrogen. And now this is the first time I use green, because if I start the business as being, can it be more competitive than the existing lines? The answer is yes. And the second nature for me is, if it's not sustainable, I don't invest and I don't spend time on it because it's worthless. So what we are planning to do, we want to become an energy company. Therefore, do project developments because you need to have your installations in place. We do the integral chain development. How should the products be delivered? Because all the components we are using are being manufactured today, only not in the specifications I want to have them. So we customize them. And then we do the exploitation, and then we become the energy combination. So this is the role and the strategic line how we want to set up our business. First in Europe, but being here also can trigger, yes, I'm also looking to see what are the possibilities, impossibilities in the US. Thank you.
So a lot of talk today about offshore wind. We consider offshore wind, we didn't come up with this, but it's a once in a generation opportunity for us in the US, particularly starting with the East Coast, up to 30 gigawatts, right? We have a flat continental shelf, high wind speeds, high population density. So tomorrow, here's a plug, mid-morning panel, we're gonna have the Danish Consulate, Lloyd's Registry, and Crowley, and we're gonna talk about the intersection between offshore wind, alternative fuels, mainly green hydrogen, and what could that mean for the future of shipping, ports, as well as maybe creating an alternative fuel, as Hugo mentioned, that's really on with less have to transport. So you can maybe perhaps make hydrogen for your Class 8 truck or for your Toyota fuel cell vehicle. So we have a few minutes for questions, and please feel free to ask anything, whether that be the technology, the sector, or even some of the entrepreneurs on their personal journey, how they got to where they are. There we go. Let's start there. Oh, come on.
Yeah. Can everybody hear me? I'm gonna try to speak loudly. Oh, hey. Okay. Oh, all right. Hello. Yeah, so currently we're sourcing from a couple of locations around the world, from Europe to South America and Asia as well. One of the kind of challenges that comes with that is, again, within the US, the kind of kelp and seaweed infrastructure is somewhat new. And so with that, the kind of processing that's required just hasn't been established here, but there's some awesome companies and new technologies that are starting up here to address that. Eventually, we want to be as closely collaborative with our partners as possible, ideally to uplift them in various regions and really help to promote that. And if that means getting more involved and vertically integrated, that's definitely something we could consider.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of micro macro algae startups such as Tessa, whether that be one is coming from the Faroe Islands looking to alternative feed for ag, feeding pigs, they burp less. Alternative materials, the bioplastics play, as well as even fertilizer. So it's interesting. Anyone else? In the back. You asking myself or anybody in expert on policy? Yeah. So maybe I'll take a shot at that. Just what I said earlier, benchmarking how other industries have gone through a transformation. Let's, utility energy, right? That's a combination of regulations, pollute less, as well as a carrot and stick, which of public policy to encourage more clean tech. That you can argue is a reflection of public will that went into policy. So I think, similar to the ocean economy, I think it starts with one is this more awareness. So that could be consumer behavior, but that also can transform itself into public policy. Yeah, not really surprised. A lot of the public policy leadership you see is really coming from the European Union, right? We really should thank the German ratepayer for our wind and solar today because of really what started decades ago, similar, right? Whether that be banning plastics, which is the club, or putting in some more incentives like you had, let's say, with electric vehicles on tax incentives. So it's a plethora of different regulatory. We though focus, I think all 5 of us here focus on the startup side, and there's dedicated organization, Ocean Foundation, Ocean Conservancy, New England Aquarium, Monterey Bay Aquarium, who definitely focus on lobbying our public sector leaders for more. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah. Sir.
You are competing against like a pretty massive market. So wondering how like pricing comes into play, like whether like Alginate will be able to like offer something that's cheaper eventually than like other textiles. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really amazing question, and I think yes and no to all of the things that you asked. So one of which I was alluding to a little bit in the presentation is that right now we see that demand from corporates and non-corporates, even just consumers, is much larger than the materials that are currently in existence can fill. And so because of that, there is an opportunity to have more leverage and more of a say in terms of how those margins are dictated. However, I think, as we look at impact as a whole, we want to make sure that this is accessible to everyone and that, we're not kind of pricing anyone out. And so cost competitiveness is super important to our model and why we want to work with existing resources and infrastructure that's already proven to be economically viable. However, I do think it's important to avoid the commodities space because then you start getting into really tricky territory that puts you in a position to potentially perpetuate the negative systems that we're currently working with, which of course aren't getting us anywhere fantastic.
Yeah, if I could add to having come out of the clean tech sectors, if you go right into the commodity space and make it cheap, you're in for a bloodbath. So the idea, the concept of an early adopter is our view is it's okay to have a price premium because the early adopters tend to have a certain type of spending power, right? And then the theory is that the early adopters drive adoption, and then you have a declining cost curve. I mean, another case study is organic food, a whole paycheck, et cetera, right? But there's organic food in Walmart today and in Target as that cost and pricing goes down. So it's that's a tough bit of a balance in the venture community is how do you get the funding and the revenue you need, operating margin to continue, but yet you also want to have a massive impact and want to get close to a cost point where you can have mass adoption. Dan.
I'm wondering, some industries are really exposed to risk related to the health of ecosystem. But it's interesting that it's not obvious what your direct exposure is to things like biodiversity or ocean heating or acidification. So I'm just wondering if you can speak a little bit to ways that you think about the health of the ocean as a operating condition, whether that's a risk-free business.
Who's that directed to, Dan?
I'll leave it open, whichever it resonates with.
Yeah, that resonates with me for sure. That's essentially what we're trying to balance. And really why we've gone to this kind of model where we're looking at where are your risks, and we look at it both from say like a hurricane or erosion, but also from what is the health of that biodiversity look like, what is the health of those natural systems. As we move into climate change impacts and things like ocean acidification, things are going to get dicey. And so I think the ability to monitor those systems and then react to those changes in real time is going to be where we're going to have to operate in the future. And so things like remote sensing, distributed sensor networks, those are going to be really important as we try to manage these systems. And it's really interesting when we look at how we have managed our ecosystems in this country. It's mainly been just leave them alone. We'll set up a national forest, we'll set up a marine sanctuary, and let's just leave it alone. And what we're realizing is it still gets touched. And the European way of managing the ecosystems is more like a garden, right? You understand it, you deeply tend to it, and you culture it. And I think we're going to have to move to systems like that.
I'll take one more question. Sir?
Question about what is it that makes it so unique that it's more efficient than standard?
If you look at that, it's if you do the integration of the product, why can you have this higher efficiency? Is that products are made and have certain characteristics, and they should comply. For example, wind turbines, that they are allowed to be connected to the electrical grid, which has very strict rulings. Also, the electrolyzer connecting it to the grid has the feed from the grid and need to go into electrolysis, a DC system, so you need to rectify it. What a lot of people don't do is a wind turbine already have, saying, an AC to DC conversion and a DC to AC conversion. So you can take out roughly 5 conversion steps, each highly performant, 98%, but altogether meaning reduction of 10%. That's one part. The other part, even that's pure efficiency, higher capacity. The other part is, if I don't need to have all these components in the product, I don't need to pay for them, I don't need to maintain them, and they cannot fail. So reliability goes up. And that are the aspects which all have to be taken into account if you look to the system and say, okay, what is now the way to carry the energy to your customers? Now, what is the most efficient way of doing it? That is, in principle, what is a little bit behind, and I hope that answers your question. Of
Yeah, and if I could, just to bring it home, right? I think North Carolina is about to put out its RFPs at some point offshore wind. So once again, to emphasize, the Northeast is so densely populated. Most of us live on the coast, and you have offshore wind that can come in at almost a 50% higher capacity factor than onshore wind. So less transport, make it at the source to the end customer. Right, if I can summarize what you.
Yeah, it's good enough, Mark.
Great, I don't see a hook, so I'm just gonna take one more question unless until you kick us off. Sir.
We're anticipating, as most of civilization is on the coast. That's part of it. But we're also looking at offshore and then the watershed. And as we look to those areas, we have things like offshore wind, which is going in offshore, and those are going to be, they're going to have transmission lines that come onshore, things like that, the scour protection around the turbines and the anchors and everything. And then you have railways that are on our coastlines. You have roads. And then as you move up the watershed, there's other issues that are being factored in now to increase flooding. And how do we deal with that increased flooding? And all of that's going to require infrastructure to take part of. And so when you look globally, I mean, it's in the trillions, right? But what we're going to do is we're taking, as a part of our business model, is to take on these corporate entities that have a lot of this infrastructure already out there, and then help them in some of their biggest pains, which is on the coastline.
Hey, thank you all for coming.